This is horrible. My parents are condemned to poison my kids.
Canadian mother Sophie Brassard has tested positive on an HIV test. She didn't want to give her children the AIDS drug AZT because she believes it's toxic. Her children have been taken away by the authorities, and Sophie's parents are now legally bound to administer the drug.
Oh, I miss them so much. And I'm so scared that permanent damage is going to be caused to them.
In South Africa, many are clamoring to be given AZT. But in other countries, some HIV-positive pregnant mothers are so worried about AZT's toxicity that they've refused to give it to their children, resulting in legal actions against them.
I can hardly begin to describe how horrific I find the idea of the medication AZT being given to pregnant women and to newborn babies. I've seen the effects of it on adult men and adult women, and it's a very strong drug, it's very toxic.
This HIV test-positive mother's rejection of AZT and refusal to test her baby for HIV went to the High Court in the United Kingdom. The judgment went against her, and the judge ordered her to test the child. She fled the country with her partner and baby, and they are now fugitives. This mother, like Sophie, is challenging the fundamental beliefs about AIDS. New doubts are rising up about the causes and treatment of AIDS.
South Africa is in the middle of an important re-evaluation about what has been described as the greatest plague the world has known, AIDS. Today, there are many scientists and communities around the world who profoundly challenge the idea that a virus, HIV, causes AIDS. Their voices have seldom been heard. In Pretoria, South Africa, President Thabo Mbeki is bringing together an international expert panel to allow a wider range of opinions to be heard.
Because all of us have been, as it were, brought up on an orthodox view. There are certain things that one thought one knows. HIV equals AIDS equals death. And one of the things that became clear, and actually rather disturbing, was the fact that there was a view that was being expressed by people whose scientific credentials you can't question. I'm not saying that they're necessarily correct, but it seemed to me that there had been a determined effort to exclude their voice, to silence it.
I've been reporting on the unfolding of the AIDS debate since 1986 in a series of documentaries allowing some of the experts that have been marginalized a voice. One of the earliest dissenting voices was that of molecular biologist Professor Peter Duesberg, member of the United States National Academy of Sciences. Through a series of published papers, he has stated that it's not an HIV or human immune virus that causes AIDS, and that AZT is toxic. AIDS was not infectious, he said, and in Africa people were dying not of HIV, but of poverty, malnutrition, dirty water, and the old diseases like malaria and TB that go untreated. This led our team to travel across Africa in 1993, east to west, to Tanzania, Cote d'Ivoire, Cameroon, and Uganda. Our purpose was to find out if people were really dying in high numbers, and of what. In Rakai village, the total breakdown of the medical services was all too apparent. We visited the local hospital in this so-called epicenter of AIDS and found a sorry scene. Not a single AIDS patient, only an empty ward. No nurses, no doctors, only one tiny baby suffering from malaria convulsions, surrounded by her silent family. We then found the only member of staff who got up from her sickbed to speak to us.
I work as a midwife, and I also help in the treatment of other patients. Now I'm sick.
What do you have?
I have malaria.
Lack of staff and medicines at these local hospitals and dispensaries has meant that sick people simply stay in their own homes. But Nurse Maxentia did agree to show us the medicines cabinet stocked with some drugs supplied free under the World Health Organization Essential Drugs Program. However, under a new cost-sharing scheme, villagers are now asked to pay a fixed rate for them, which for most means going without. Africa has been blamed for the spread of AIDS around the world, but statistics for AIDS in Africa have been inflated because most AIDS is diagnosed through symptoms alone, without an HIV test. Many people are wrongly identified. Some TB cases are wrongly called AIDS. Dr. Martin Okoton Wang is a TB specialist in Kampala, Uganda.
A patient who has TB and is HIV positive would appear exactly the same as a patient who has TB and is HIV negative. Clinically, both patients could present with prolonged fever. Both patients present with a loss of weight, marked loss of weight actually. Both patients would present with prolonged cough, and in both cases, the cough could equally be productive. Now, therefore, clinically, I cannot differentiate the two.
In Kagera, Tanzania, Lucy is a frightening example of wrong diagnosis. She was diagnosed HIV positive in an unconfirmed screening test. She was ostracized by her community and became very ill. NGO worker Philippe Kreenan and his wife took her into their care, and she was returned to health.
It's very seldom you see people who have been stigmatized with AIDS who are not dying a few months later. So Lucy was one of the first persons who, because we didn't support the AIDS tag on her, recovered and was the proof to the community that you can recover from such episodes.
Ninavyofanya kazi na ninavyojisikia hali yangu ni nzuri kama mwanzoni nilivyokuwa kabla sijaumwa.
What would you like to see happen?
Labda nategemea hapo baadaye kuzaa watoto.
A few months later, Lucy tested negative 3 times running and is now happily back in her community. As more and more publicity was given to the possible heterosexual spread of AIDS, and the flames of plague terror were fanned, the issue of the drug AZT, marketed as a therapy for AIDS, came to the fore. AZT was licensed in 1987 through a multi-center trial in the USA. Those trials had been described as deeply flawed by AIDS researcher John Lauritsen, who studied the U.S. Food and Drug Administration papers, which were acquired through the Freedom of Information procedure.
This study was incredibly uncontrolled and sloppy. Violations of protocol were widespread, and I might add that protocols are the rules of the game for a study. So if you violate the rules of a game, you are cheating.
In utter desperation, I took AZT. It made me ill. I went through that process 5 times. I was never on it for more than a month, but my partner, Kevin, persisted, and he died.
6 years later, Michael is in good health and still actively opposing the marketing of AZT. By 1993 in London, the debate about false AIDS statistics and damage from AZT had spilled out onto the streets. There was strong protest about the Penta trials across Europe, involving giving AZT to pregnant African women and their babies. This child's mother felt she hadn't been given enough information.
They test him. They will tell me the results in 1 month's time, but I'm worried he should be given the AZT treatment, and I need more information about it.
Maryland Bazara from Uganda is a community worker with African families in London.
People are suffering. These side effects are so strong from this medicine AZT. They're losing their muscles, they have headaches, they have diarrhea and all this. Most of them were not told about the side effects. So they need more information.
The debate went to Parliament in that same year, and George Galloway MP tabled a series of searching questions.
If people knew that this highly toxic drug was being administered to potentially hundreds of small children, as I say, most of them black, most of them without a voice, their parents without a voice in British society, then I think that these tests would be stopped.
There was little change in the next 5 years until the matter was raised again in the House of Lords in 1999. Information that HIV testing is not reliable was becoming more public, and the problem of what was being tested for was under scrutiny. Had HIV ever been properly isolated? Continuum magazine, edited by Hugh Christie, published an interview with HIV co-discoverer Professor Luc Montagnier, in which he stated that HIV has never been purified, an essential step in designing reliable tests for any virus.
Well, of course we looked for it. We saw some particles, but they didn't have the morphology of retroviruses.
He later said,
I repeat, we did not purify.
It was startling that Professor Montagnier decided to acknowledge in his interview with Jamel Tahi in Continuum that as far back as 1983, his team were not able to purify anything that you might call HIV, despite what he termed a Roman effort. So who should be surprised that when the same thing was attempted by expert laboratories in Germany and the United States, who published their results in the journal Virology, what they found was proteins and cellular debris.
At the Royal Perth Hospital, Western Australia, Dr. Valander Turner explains that without proteins from purified virus, HIV testing could produce countless wrong results.
If there is such a thing as an AIDS-causing retrovirus, then its unique body part, that is its proteins, should only be found in HIV-positive individuals and individuals who have AIDS. But this is not the case. All the principal HIV proteins have been found in all manner of cells from healthy human beings who are HIV negative.
Also in Perth, senior AIDS researcher Eleni Eliopoulos has published numerous scientific papers on the disturbing fact that no scientist has ever collected a pure sample of what people call HIV.
There is no way to test for HIV. This is because all the tests are based on indirect markers, none of which has been validated by proving that the markers are positive only when the virus is present.
The only type of test routinely used in England and Africa is an ELISA antibody test. It reacts if a person's blood has enough antibodies that bind with a set of test kit proteins, proteins still marketed as belonging only to HIV. If it reacts, the color density changes. These changes are a matter of degree, high or low, not yes or no. Peter Nichols is a 25-year-old gay man. He volunteered to take part in a research project coordinated for Channel 4. His blood was tested on 3 HIV test kits commonly used by laboratories. The blood samples were run through the kits twice by London University Medical School under different code numbers. Each time Peter's blood tested positive. But several weeks later, Peter tested negative at St Mary's Hospital, West London, and again negative at the Royal Free in North London. How did he feel about these conflicting results?
Confused in a way, obviously glad that now, having received 2 sets of negative results, I'm obviously fairly confident that I'm HIV negative now. But confused as to why I would receive a positive result in the first place from the experiment that we did. And how many other false positive results are there floating around that people don't know about?
Professor Etienne de Haven pioneered the electron microscopy of retroviruses at the Sloan Kettering Institute, New York. Today, he's highly critical of the research into so-called HIV.
There is a most urgent need to redirect research funding. Funds should go to laboratories working on other IDs, totally independent from HIV, and no longer restricted to laboratories working on a hypothesis which has never been proven.
A sense that new information could bring real solutions to AIDS will be driving President Thabo Mbeki's international panel. High on the agenda will be the issue of AZT and pregnant women.
Last year you were reported as saying in Parliament that you were concerned about the giving of AZT to pregnant mothers. Why were you concerned?
Well, because lots of questions had been raised around the question of the toxicity of the drug. It was very serious. we have a responsibility as a government to determine matters of public health, and therefore we can take decisions, we have to take decisions that impact directly on human beings. And it seemed to me that where doubts had been raised, questions had been raised around these toxicity questions, and the efficacy even of AZT and other drugs, that it was necessary again to go into these matters because it wouldn't sit easily on one's conscience to discover that you had been warned that there could be danger, and nevertheless you went ahead and said, despite the danger, let's dispense these drugs.
Some AIDS doctors say that the evidence is overwhelming that HIV is the cause of AIDS and that AZT is of benefit. What is your comment on that?
Well, I say that why don't we bring all points of view about those matters together, let them sit around the table, discuss all of this, produce such evidence as there may be, and let's see what the outcome of all of that discussion is, which is why this international panel that we're talking about, they may very well be correct. But I think that if they are correct and they are convinced about their correctness, it ought to be, it would be a good thing for them to demonstrate to those who are wrong that they are wrong.
People say that you're not keen on giving AZT to pregnant women. I'm personalizing this, of course, because it's too expensive and in some ways you're seen as penny pinching. What do you reply to them?
Well, that surely must be a consideration for anybody who decides that this drug must be given in this, like, to, as it were, stop these transmissions, again, as it said, from mother-to-child transmissions. It's extremely costly. That's something that would have to be taken into account. But you see, I'm saying that we also need, in that context, to answer questions. This particular question about the toxic effect of this drug. If you sit in a position where decisions that you take would have a serious impact on the health of people, you can't ignore a lot of experience around the world, which says this drug has these negative effects.
Why have you been so outspoken recently about greed and the pharmaceutical companies?
I think a lot of the discussion that needs to take place and an approach to health and treatment of people, it does seem indeed to be driven by profit. You probably would know this, we had a long wrangle with the pharmaceutical industry internationally about issues of parallel imports and so on. What we were saying was that we want to make medicines and drugs as affordable as is possible to what is basically largely, in South Africa, a poor population. We needed to find these medicines where they were cheapest, properly controlled, properly tested, the genuine product, no counterfeits.
In the press, you are exhorted to confine, and I quote, confine yourself to the job to which you were elected and leave specialized subjects to the taking of best available advice. That was today. What's your response?
Well, I don't imagine that heads of government would ever have the possibility to say, I'm not specialized in economics, therefore I can't take economic decisions. I'm not a soldier, therefore I can't take decisions about matters affecting the Department of Defense. Or I'm not an educationist, a pedagogue, therefore I can't take decisions about education. I don't particularly see why health should be treated as this extremely specialized thing about why the president of a country can't take health decisions. I think it would be a dereliction of duty to say, well, as far as health policy is concerned, we shall leave that matter to the doctors and the scientists. As far as education is concerned, we'll leave that matter to educationists and pedagogues. I think the argument is absurd, actually.
How do you feel about the reaction of some of your country's leading virologists and intellectuals to your position?
I get the sense that, as I was saying earlier, that we've all of us been educated into one school of thought. I'm really I'm not surprised at all that you would find, I'm quite sure, among the overwhelming majority of scientists in this field in this country, people who would hold a particular point of view because that's all they were exposed to. This other point of view, which is, I think, part of what is frightening, this alternative point of view, in a sense, has been blacked out. It must not be heard, mustn't be seen. I mean, even that's a demand now. Why is Thabo Mbeki talking to discredited scientists, giving them legitimacy? It's a very worrying thing that anybody can say today, in today's world, that there is a point of view that is prohibited, that's banned, that there are heretics who must be burnt at the stake. And it's all said in the name of science and health. Can't be right.
Now, it has been said that the pharmaceutical industry is more powerful than governments. Are you actually going to go as far as taking this debate to other world leaders, like President Clinton, like Prime Minister Blair, or perhaps the Prime Minister of India, who has expressed his support for an investigation into these issues, as you are?
Sure, certainly, yes. I do want to raise the matter with a number of political leaders around the world, at least to inform them about what we're doing, to get them to understand the truth about this issue, not what they might see on television or read in some newspaper. And indeed, we were very encouraged to see the Indian government getting itself involved in this issue. I think the concern around the problem questions, which in a sense have been hidden, I think that concern will grow around the world. And the matter is critical because the reason we're doing all of this is to be able to respond correctly to what is reported to be a major catastrophe on the African continent. We have to respond correctly and urgently. And you can't say respond correctly by closing your eyes and ears to any point of view, any scientific evidence that is produced. A matter that seems to be very clear in terms of the alternative view that is being presented is, what do you expect to happen in Africa with regard to immune systems, where people are poor, subjected to repeated infections, and all of that? Surely you would expect these immune systems to collapse. And I've no doubt that that is happening. But then to attribute such immune deficiency to a virus produces a specific response. And what we're discussing here as the South African government is that it seems incorrect to respond to this AIDS challenge within a narrow band. If we only said there's a virus, safe sex, use a condom, end of story, we won't stop the spread of AIDS in this country.
South Africa's children will benefit from the work of President Mbeki's expert panel, and health workers like Sister Maria Nukeri at Alexandra Clinic look forward to the findings.
I believe what the step that the state president has taken pertaining to this panel that has to look into the whole arena of HIV is most welcomed, because from that, I believe we'll have a clear mandate as to the way forward.